Now, our fourth speaker and final speaker tonight, before we go to questions, is Bill Bayfield. Now, Bill's been the Chief Executive of Environment Canterbury, which is the regional council here, of course, since 2011. He's well known for his leadership qualities in matters of water resources and strategic planning for local and central government projects in New Zealand, along with his broad experience in environmental management. He describes himself as being someone who relishes a challenge and has always been involved in leading change in the roles he's taken. When Bill arrived in here tonight, he said, "This is a time warp. I've been to these things in the past so many times and talked particularly on climate change." He has a background, in fact, there, and he'll explain that, I'm sure, as we go through. But Bill's going to come and give us a presentation tonight on adaptation for the Canterbury region. Bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. It is a time warp for me. For 2.5 years, when I worked at the Ministry of the Environment, I ran the New Zealand Climate Change Office. And I was doing this on a, weekly, if not more frequent basis. And I was very grateful to go and be CEO of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and then come to be CEO of Canterbury. But it would seem I'm haunted and I'm back into it. And really it's a good wake-up call, so I appreciate it. I'm just talking, I haven't got slides, all right? So it's just a quick chat, and it's about adaptation for the Canterbury region. The key takeout I want to leave you with is a provide to assurance really to you and in a segue to the people of Canterbury, that we're prepared to lead in the face of the adaptation challenges that we have for the Canterbury region. I'm very, very grateful that the focus is on adaptation and not mitigation. For so many times or so much frequency, the Regional Council is saddled with responsibility for mitigation. And having done that, when I was in the Climate Change Office, I don't really want to go back there. It is very, very complicated and very, very hard work. It hurts your head. So climate change adaptation is preparing for the impacts of climate change or increased climate variability on people, environment and the economy. Climate change mitigation is those actions that seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in New Zealand for the present, and it may remain so, I think, for the foreseeable future, central government will maintain control of that area. Our obligations, therefore, as a unit of local government are to focus on the consequences of those extreme weather events, changing weather patterns for regions and communities, and prepare for managing and minimising the effects of those on environmental and community sustainability. That last bit I said, extreme weather events. I just love that previous speaker, Andy. I'd forgotten how good you were, but I just constantly remind myself that Bordeaux and Christchurch are at the same latitude. I'd just leave you with that. All right? So while we're grateful that central government is taking that role in leading greenhouse gas mitigation policy and that our focus is on adaptation, I will just say that we support the government and the current government and all that it's doing on greenhouse gas and finding out how we're going to meet our Paris obligations. I think the formation of the Climate Change Committee a month ago, or only 3 weeks ago actually, is a huge start as we begin to work up how we transition to a zero carbon economy. And I have no doubt that that will impact the work we do, and we will enjoy making submissions and contributions as they work out how they're going to deliver it. For us though, and it was a Labor government in 2004 who gave us the clear instructions under the Resource Management Act, Energy and Climate Change Amendment Act that we were prohibited from considering the effects of climate change of discharges into the air of greenhouse gases. Prohibited is quite strong. They also went so far as to be absolutely clear that under the Resource Management Act, all persons, that's inevitably us, exercising functions and powers relating to the management, use, development and protection of natural and physical resources shall have particular regard to the effects of climate change, not the causes, the effects arising from it. So adaptation is it for us. What have we been doing? It's interesting to take a look at what we're doing, and I've got a feeling that's why I'm here tonight. So we know that since 2004, if not before, climate change is being incorporated into the key work that Environment Canterbury delivers across the region. It features in our policy statements. If you look at our policy statement for 2013, it features in areas of land use infrastructure, freshwater, coastal environment. It's in there for biodiversity, particularly natural hazards, and equally for the section that we put in on soils and energy. As part of our science work, we have for many years built climate change to the best of our ability based on knowledge we get, particularly from IPCC, Andy, and others, built it in. Now, when you look at that, those science teams, whether they've been working with our river engineers on flood modelling or on flood mitigation work, or for that matter, working on coastal erosion and coastal work. And just to give you an example that flags that was recently when Tonkin and Taylor produced its information from Christchurch City, which caused, as we all recall, a lot of consternation about the reality of just what coastal erosion, sea level rise might result from a climate change scenario. What we tried to do was make sure that our scientists were right alongside Tonkin and Taylor, right alongside Christchurch City, so that there's one message, that those are what we believe are the best information on which you and the community can make decisions. I think that's one of the keys. I also wanted to touch on the work of our zone committees through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, because very early on we gave each of those zone committees historical climate information. We gave them an idea of what we knew about future climate change and future-proofing opportunities, and they took those on board in each of their discussions. And for most of the zone committees, you will still find that climate variability in particular and the future-proofing is still built into their discussions and built into their work. I wanted to touch on a couple that I think of I guess, work that we're doing now that, or in the past, that's having a big influence now, making a big difference to us. The first one for me is mitigating future flood risk through natural hazard risk management and mitigation through river engineering. And it is really the factoring in of climate change that has asked the hard questions of some of our river schemes, our river management schemes, particularly the Waimakariri, when you think about it, and the changes, that's a great tune, and the changes that we're seeing in that scheme at the moment. It's interesting now to leap forward and draw on the Cullen report on the Whakatane river breach and flooding escalate of just last year, and to look at that and see that Cullen raises that question, in my view very aptly, about our ability to control a river within 2 stop banks and the expectation that you consistently increase those stop banks in height, because you can't. All right, it actually increases the risk and increases the vulnerability. So what you have to do, and he's recommended, is Whakatane now looks to implement the secondary flow channels and the secondary stop banks. Well, guess what? Your river engineers came to that conclusion basically nearly 15 years ago, and we are now effectively 7 years into delivery of the secondary stop banks and the secondary flow paths on the Waimakariri River. And so it's that plugging it in. But you know, I don't think we ever told you that that was one of the key reasons we were doing it. And that seems really strange to me. When I look at our river management and I see what we're doing, it shows to me best practice. And it also raises a fundamental question of trying to control a magnificent braided river between 2 stop banks. But we won't go there. Just remember that the last time I think a dead sheet flowed through Cathedral Square was only the early 1960s. Other one I wanted to touch on is resilience to what I call climate-induced drought or more frequent droughts. And I wanted to touch on water storage, and I wanted to look at the role of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy in that. Basically, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, as one of its targets, has ensuring water security for all water users. It doesn't matter whether it's drinking water, horticulture or agriculture, and now I will add viticulture. All right, it's really important, I can see that. But also retaining those amenity, cultural and mahangakai values that we all have. What the Canterbury Water Management Strategy again did was take on board the very best information that it had at the time in looking at where our rivers, our rainfall were going to go, drawing on the work of these guys very much so. And it strikes me as many people have identified the infrastructure component of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy as being water for cows, and I accept that. What I would suggest to you looking at it though, it's actually water storage for resilience. It was actually recognising that only by storing water from our 7 big alpine rivers, which while the flow characteristics in them might change, the flow volumes are unlikely to. So our ability to harvest off those big 7 rivers is enabling to put that water into storage and then to take the pressure off where we need to take the pressure off, which is the shallow groundwater aquifers and the surface waters. Because everything we see from this tells us that those systems that are already pressured now will be even further pressured if climate change comes to bear. That work was inherent in the CWMS and still is. That idea of using water storage off our big alpine rivers, off our big advantage rivers in terms of delivering for the future. And if it waters Tempranillo or Cabernet Sauvignon, I'll be perfectly happy in the future rather than cows. Right. That means that we have identified, it hasn't been hard for us, the work that we've been doing probably over the last decade in feeding climate change into what we do, into what we think, into our science, into our planning. So in the last year, we've kind of been debating what our role is in climate change and how to lift our game, recognising that climate change was now becoming one of the key drivers for us. And so we sat down with our councillors and we thought about what do we want to be recognised as, and the answer was as a local government leader in the response to climate change. And so we had a discussion about that and we came up with, we want to actually be recognised as someone who facilitates at a regional and cross-sector collaboration level on climate-related matters. We want our climate change response decisions and activities to be clearly visible, not like they were on the Waimak, where we made a decision that seemed like a good design, but we never told you one of the driving reasons why. We want to be a leader in climate change communication because it's only by providing information out to people can they make the decisions. We are not going to make the decisions that someone should plant wine. Somebody else is going to make those decisions. We have to provide the best information for them to make the decision that works for them. Our science has to support the understanding of the potential changes and implications for Canterbury, and what you've heard from the 3 speakers before me is that our science depends on their science. We also wanted to be known for identifying opportunities and threats arising from climate change early, proactively, not reactively. We wanted to know that our work supported our communities to become more risk literate, climate change risk literate and resilient because of that. And we wanted to know that we were also effective at influencing central government policy on climate change as it emerges, because Canterbury has some quite specific and special circumstances. We just have to make sure our voice is in there in Wellington to make sure that what policy emerges works for us. So we're working as staff with our councillors to deliver that lot. So what's the next big step for us? So Environment Canterbury has decided to recognise the importance of climate change and actually we've proposed the establishment of a climate change integration program in our long-term plan for 2018-2028 for the first time. And so we've got a program in our long-term plan. I speak to you now after the submissions have closed and the speakers have all had their piece, and I can tell you that the vast majority of people said, you should have done it a while ago and you should be doing more. So it's been very, very well supported, that change and that program. That climate change integration program aims to provide alignment and visibility of the work that we are doing in response to climate change, make it visible to all, make it available to all. As well as which we're doing now, so actually building a program into our long-term plan, we've also convened about 6 months ago a regional climate working group, and this involves Dr. Stephanie Ricksecker, our Director of Science, who has got together with the 10 territorial authorities, officers from each of the authorities, from Christchurch City to Waitaki to Kaikoura, and are focusing on basically how to improve our understanding of, collectively as local government, and our action to adaptation as a result of climate change. And we've been really lucky in that that group has now received, if you like, the stamp of approval from the Mayoral Forum, has a scope in terms of reference, has been meeting for 5 months and is ripping into it. We're really lucky too that Ngāi Tahu, Te Runangaro Ngāi Tahu, who have done an excellent piece of work assessing climate change in Canterbury and its implications for Ngāi Tahu, have joined that working group. And so that group is going from strength to strength. We also have improved our engagement with major climate research programs like Deep South, which we're challenged, and the Resilient to Nature's Challenge, to identify, and with Andy's work, to identify relevant research and opportunities for Canterbury-focused case studies. What we find is that if we have to go out and talk to a community, whether it be the Hakataramia or whether it be Kaikoura, or mostly they want to talk about earthquakes at the moment, you've got to have local information. If you haven't got information that resonates with them and is real, you're having an ethereal, ungrounded conversation, and it's not helpful. You can actually set yourself and them back. Having written that into our 10-year plan, and we're excited about our integrated program, we've now got to develop before the 1st of July a work program that sets out how we're going to deliver it over the next 3 years at least and beyond. But let's face it, it's going to be with us for generations to come. And so we're doing that work program. We've also written into ourselves a level of service. And we thought about that level of service, and we thought about writing it in a way that didn't make us the natural regulators, didn't make us the natural pushers, if you follow me. What we wanted to be was the provider of information. So it was, our level of service is to provide support for our communities to become more risk literate and resilient to climate change, providing them with the right information so that they make the right decisions. We've internally got to develop a process to ensure that climate change is robustly and consistently factored into all our decisions, and that is then visible and people can see it. And we haven't been perfect at that in the past. Although we've been doing it, you've not been aware or not seen it. You need to know. And the interesting thing in that is to do the gaps analysis and the SWOT analysis. I've given you a good example with the CWMS. I've given you a good example in terms of flood management or river engineering. But there are other areas where we don't think we're quite as smart as that. And so we've got to make sure that right across all our portfolios, climate change is bedded in. Key one for us that we're building to is the review of our coastal plan. And we look forward to using Helen's process when we do that. And that'll happen for us in 2019, 2020 as we gear up. And it is interesting that we'll be reviewing our coastal plan at the same time the government's brought out a national policy statement on natural hazards, which they've indicated. They'll have brought out a proposed national environmental standard for marine aquaculture, and we'll have a zero carbon act. So really our planning, the nature of our planning and our ability to take on board climate change and build that in is going to increase quite dramatically, quite rapidly. So this is a council that has taken on something new, put a new badge on it, dusted it off, put a new program into its long-term plan, and says that we look forward to proving to everybody that we're prepared and ready to face adaptation in Canterbury. Thank you very much.